Welcome to this deep dive from the Olive Grove podcast.
Glad you could join us.
Today, we're digging into something ancient Hosea chapter 7, but it feels surprisingly relevant. We've got this really in-depth study on it, focusing on the old northern kingdom of Israel.
That's right. And our mission here really is to unpack what this study reveals about Israel back then, their challenges, their mistakes.
And see what lessons kind of jump out for us right here, right now.
Exactly.
Because the source material we're working from, it highlights some pretty heavy themes. We're talking about idolatry, the serious fallout from turning away from God.
Yeah, and major corruption in the leadership.
And what strikes me is how relatable these ancient problems still feel. It's kind of unnerving.
It really is. The study kicks things off by diving straight into Hosea chapter 7, zeroing in on just how widespread idolatry had become in that northern kingdom.
And it uses a really specific example to paint the picture, doesn't it? King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. The source actually calls it a really bad marriage. Which, sounds a bit understated given the impact. It massively affected things, especially Samaria, the capital.
Yeah, Samaria became more than just a political center. The study really emphasizes how it turned into the capital of sin. It was founded by King Omri, but then his son Ahab, through his marriage to Jezebel, who remembers is a Sidonian princess, daughter of a pagan king, he basically imported Baal worship right into the city's heart.
So Baal worship, that's worshiping a Canaanite fertility god, right? A huge step away from the God of Israel.
A massive step. This mixing, this religious syncretism, that became the wickedness of Samaria the text talks about.
Okay, so Hosea 7, verse 1a. It starts with this really sharp contrast. God wants to heal Israel.
Which echoes the hope from the previous chapter, if they'd just repent. He offered restoration.
But instead, what he sees are their crimes, their wickedness. The study notes that Ephraim, as a tribe, was sort of leading the charge in spreading this idolatry, and Samaria was ground zero.
Yeah, under Ahab and Jezebel. It's like God's reaching out a hand saying, let me help, and they're just shoving their actions in his face, saying, look what we're doing instead.
And what were they doing? Verses 1b and 2, it sounds like total chaos, deceit, theft, robbers.
But the thing that really jumps out from this study's analysis, for me at least, is the complete loss of shame.
Oh, that stood out to me too.
Why?
Yeah, the study makes a point that they weren't even trying to hide it. They were almost, parading their sin?
Exactly. Proudly, almost. And doing it thinking somehow that God either didn't see it or wouldn't remember it. Like their evil deeds weren't piling up right in front of him.
Wow.
And the study draws a direct line to today here. It suggests this lack of shame, this open embrace of what it terms the sin of the world, feels disturbingly familiar now, even among people who might, identify with faith.
That parallel is, it's unsettling how quickly things can shift away from core principles. And then verse 3 gets right into the leadership's role in all this mess.
It's a really damning verse, isn't it?
Yeah.
They make the king glad with their wickedness and the leaders with their lies. The study doesn't mince words here. It basically says the entire government wasn't just looking the other way.
Yeah.
They were actively sponsoring the people's sin.
Sponsoring sin.
Right.
That phrase just hits hard. And the source connects that directly to today, suggesting it's similar when, as the study argues, laws get passed that sort of redefine things that, from a faith perspective, might be called sin, making them seem okay, even legally protected.
Right. The study frames it as leadership enabling, maybe even encouraging behaviors that go against, divine principles.
It really forces that question the source raises. What is leadership supposed to do? Guide towards righteousness, or can it actually drive unrighteousness and even celebrate it?
Yeah.
Okay, then the source moves to this really intense metaphor. It runs across verses 4, 6, and 7. The oven.
It's such a powerful image for what was going on inside them, in their hearts and minds. Verse 4 says, their sin is established in them like fire in an oven. Baker gets it hot and lets it sit.
Right, it just burns on its own.
Exactly. It doesn't need constant stoking. It implies sin wasn't just a passing thought for them. It was this deep-seated, constant state just burning away inside.
It's a self-fueling fire of sin. That's heavy.
And verse 6 just cranks it up. Even while they sleep, their minds are working on evil plans. It compares it to the baker sleeping while the oven fire just smolders.
Ready to flare up.
Right. So when they wake up, boom, those simmering plans burst into action. It's not just bad thoughts. It's like premeditated wickedness ready to go.
So not just bad choices here and there, but this constant internal engine of evil erupting first thing in the morning. And verse 7 links this internal heat back to the leaders again. They are all as hot as an oven, and they devour their judges. All their kings have fallen.
Yeah, the study connects that hot as an oven, consuming rulers, to the story in Daniel 3, the fiery furnace, where the heat was so intense it killed the soldiers.
Oh!
It shows how self-destructive their sin and corruption was. It turned inward and just consumed their own leadership. And the source highlights that stark historical fact. The northern kingdom, Israel, they never had a single good king, not one who followed God faithfully.
Never one good king. Wow, that really underscores the level of corruption the study is talking about. Okay, so leaving that fiery oven image, the material shifts to another metaphor in verse 8. Ephraim is mixing himself with the peoples and becoming a half-baked cake.
Right. The mixing, according to the source, mainly means those forbidden alliances and marriages with pagan nations. God had warned them, this would pull them into idolatry.
Like Solomon. The study mentions him.
Yeah, exactly. His foreign wives were a key factor in him turning to idols, which, down the line, helped split the kingdom apart after he died.
Okay, and the half-baked cake, what's the idea there?
Well, think of making a pancake, but you forget to flip it. One side gets totally burnt, black and hard. The other side is still raw, gooey dough.
Useless, basically.
Totally useless. And the source uses that to show how trying to worship God and dabble in idolatry or trust in pagan ways just doesn't work. You don't get some new, better blend. You get something ruined, spoiled, burnt by worldly compromise on one side, raw from a lack of real faith on the other.
So mixing didn't strengthen them, it just wrecked their spiritual integrity, made them ineffective. And this mixing had real effects, didn't it? Verse 9 says, "Foreigners have eaten up his strength, but he doesn't know it."
Yes, gray hairs appear on him here and there, but he doesn't know it. Their strength, spiritual and maybe even physical, was just slowly draining away because of these compromises, these foreign influences, and they were completely clueless.
Like gray hairs. They sneak up on you. A sign of aging, of decline, but gradual. You might not notice until it's really obvious.
Yeah, it suggests this slow, hidden weakening caused by their compromises. And the source draws a really pointed application here for followers of Jesus today.
How so?
Particularly around marriage. It argues that marrying someone who doesn't share your fundamental faith can create this constant undertow, pulling you away from God's path, potentially draining spiritual strength and hindering your walk.
So the importance of being aligned in core beliefs in our closest relationships, because a mismatch can weaken you over time, even subtly.
That's the idea. But even with this decline, this obvious weakness, Hosea 7.9 points out their attitude problem hadn't changed.
The pride of Israel testifies in his face, but in spite of all this, they haven't returned to Adonai, their God, or sought him. Still proud, even when they're clearly failing.
The study links this to a kind of false security. A spiritual arrogance, maybe thinking they're okay because, they grew up in the faith or they went through certain rituals.
Right, but without genuine ongoing faith.
Exactly. The source warns this can lead people to live in ways that totally contradict their supposed beliefs. They think they're safe, they're saved because of some past thing, even while actively sinning.
That's a serious warning against confusing, religious background with a real relationship with God. Pride blinds them to their actual state. And this pride, this false confidence, it leads them to look for help everywhere but the right place. Verses 11 and 12.
Yeah, they're compared to as silly, foolish dove, just flapping around desperately. Instead of turning to God, who'd saved them so many times before, they fly out to Egypt, then to Assyria.
The big superpowers of the day.
Right, like a dove looking everywhere for food except where it actually is. They were seeking security from worldly powers that were actually hostile to God.
They put their trust in completely the wrong place. And God's response, it's pretty stark. Even as they go, I will spread my net over them. I will bring them down. I will discipline them.
Their very attempts to find security elsewhere become the trap. The source really hammers this point for believers. Real help, real security, it only comes from God. Trying to rely on our own smarts or human systems or other powers, it's ultimately going to fail. And there are consequences.
It's a crucial reminder, isn't it? Trust God alone, not these shifting worldly powers.
Oh, absolutely.
And Hosea 7.1 free really drives home how serious this is. Woe to them, for they have strayed from me. Destruction to them, for they have wronged me. Am I supposed to redeem them when they have spoken lies against me?
By running to Egypt and Assyria, they were basically lying about God, saying, you're not enough, you can't help us, we need these other guys. The study notes that God calls people to holiness, often using tough times to refine us, But many people, then and now, just look for the easy way out.
And where does the source suggest they turn instead?
It points to things like governments, false religions, other human systems and ideas. Anywhere but listening to God's correction and his call to come back.
Which sounds a lot like verses 14 and 15 describing this kind of surface-level religion. They have not cried out to me from their hearts, even though they wail on their beds. They assemble themselves for grain and wine, yet turn away from me.
Exactly. They might go through the motions wailing, having religious gatherings, but the study points out their hearts aren't in it. They're not really seeking God. They're gathering for the grain and wine.
Looking for physical stuff. Provision from worldly sources, not God.
Right. And verse 15 is just, wow, it was I who trained and strengthened their arms, yet they plot evil against me. They completely forgot where their strength came from in the first place. And then use that God-given strength to scheme against him.
Unbelievable.
And the Source makes another connection to today here. It suggests that sometimes, maybe even people who follow Jesus might find themselves relying on, say, government programs or secular charities.
Instead of looking first to God and the faith community.
Yeah. And then it sort of challenges local churches. Have we, as the body of believers, maybe forgotten our role? Our calling to be the first place people turn for help, for support, because we've lost sight of what God has done for us.
That is a powerful challenge, suggesting that if the church isn't fulfilling its purpose, being that place of support and strength, people will naturally look elsewhere, often to systems not built on faith. Makes you really think about faith lived out in community.
It really does. And, this study we've been discussing, it comes from Enduring Freedom Ministries, EFM. And their whole focus is deeply tied into this, sharing Jesus' power, equipping believers.
Ah, that makes sense.
Themes like relying solely on God, the importance of community support, being God's hands and feet. That's core to their work.
And connecting the dots here, I know EFM actually has a book out called Misfits for Jesus. True accounts of people experiencing Jesus. It's filled with these amazing real-life stories of God working miracles through their ministry. It really shows what that reliance on God looks like practically. It's available on Amazon, and honestly, it's incredibly inspiring. Brings these Hosea principles right into today.
It absolutely does. And speaking of practical action, reflecting that call for the faithful community to be a source of help, EFM has a major project right now. They're working to establish a food pantry in Jerusalem, Israel.
Wow, in Jerusalem.
Yeah, a very tangible way of living out that call, trusting God for provision, and then being in his hands to help others in need. Supporting efforts like that, focused on God's supply and community care, feels like a direct response to the lessons we're seeing in Hosea.
It absolutely does, taking the ancient words and putting them into action today. Okay, so let's wrap up Hosea chapter 7. The final consequences laid out in verse 16 are pretty bleak.
Yeah. They return, but not upward. They are like an unreliable bow. Their leaders will die by the sword because of their angry talk. They will become a laughingstock in the land of Egypt.
So they try to return, but it's not genuinely towards God. Their commitment is shaky, useless like a bad bow. The corrupt leaders face violent ends due to their own words and actions.
Yeah, and their lack of real faith just makes them look foolish. Even to Egypt, the very place they ran to for help, they became a joke.
Okay, so distilling the main takeaways from this really sobering study of Hosea 7, we've seen just how deeply sin and idolatry can take root.
And the total failure that comes from corrupt leadership.
The serious danger of compromising your faith, mixing it with things that oppose God.
The absolute pointlessness of chasing worldly powers for help instead of trusting God alone.
And the inevitable direct consequences of turning away from the true source of life and strength.
It leaves us with some pretty big questions, doesn't it? This study draws so many parallels between ancient Israel's situation and, well, things we see around us today, that loss of shame, the leadership issues, mixing values, relying on systems instead of God.
So the question becomes, where might we, you listening, us here, where might we see ourselves or our society acting like that half-baked cake?
Yeah, or where might we be putting our trust in Egypt or Assyria, worldly solutions, instead of fully leaning on God, the actual source of our strength?
What stands out to you from this deep dive today? It definitely gives us all a lot to think about, maybe pray about.
It certainly does.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Hosea chapter 7, drawing on these insights from Enduring Freedom Ministries. We really hope this conversation sheds some light on this challenging text and its powerful relevance for our lives.
And we definitely encourage you to keep exploring the source material, keep digging into this topic on your own.
Absolutely. And if you found this valuable, if it got you thinking, please do subscribe to the Olive Grove podcast channel over on YouTube. We'd love to have you join us for more deep dives like this one.